The protector rarely introduces itself as fear. It usually arrives as reason, discipline, caution, timing, or taste. It says, "This is not the right moment. This is not the right person. This is not the right move." And because its language sounds intelligent, most people do not realize they are being managed. They think they are making a balanced decision when they are often obeying an old defense with a polished voice. The protector survives by sounding wiser than the wound that created it. This is why the protector can become one of the hardest inner forces to recognize. Grief is easier to notice because it hurts openly. Anger is easier to notice because it has heat. The protector is different because it often hides inside competence. It does not want to look emotional because emotion feels vulnerable, and vulnerability is the very threshold it was built to guard. You can usually find it in the places where your life becomes tightly controlled for reasons that seem noble. It appears in overthinking that calls itself preparation. It appears in emotional distance that calls itself maturity. It appears in isolation that calls itself peace. It appears in hyper independence that calls itself strength. And that is why people often praise their protector long before they understand its cost. The mechanism is simple once you see it clearly. Something once felt too painful, too humiliating, too chaotic, or too unsafe to meet directly. The nervous system learned that staying guarded reduced exposure, and the mind built explanations around that reduction so the strategy could continue without question. Over time, the protection stopped being a temporary response and became a style of being. What was once a shield became a personality. This changes how you interpret your own behavior. You begin to notice that some of your most consistent habits were never chosen from freedom. They were chosen from prevention. You did not always withdraw because solitude was true for you. Sometimes you withdrew because closeness activated old uncertainty. You did not always stay in control because structure was your nature. Sometimes you stayed in control because uncertainty felt too similar to past danger. That is where the protector becomes easy to misunderstand. People often assume that whatever feels stable must be aligned. But stability can come from constriction just as easily as it can come from wisdom. A person can feel calm because they are deeply grounded, and a person can feel calm because they have narrowed life down to what does not threaten them. The sensation may look similar on the outside, while the inner reality is completely different. You may notice something important when you begin watching this pattern in ordinary life. The protector does not only block pain, it also blocks surprise, softness, exposure, dependence, joy, and the kind of real contact that cannot be controlled in advance. This is why its grip can become so total without announcing itself as a problem. It is not merely keeping danger out, it is quietly deciding how much life you are allowed to feel. This becomes even clearer in relationships. Many people think their issue is trust, but what they actually have is a loyal protector managing all trust conditions before closeness can deepen. It asks whether the other person is safe enough, clear enough, consistent enough, aware enough, evolved enough. And some of those questions are reasonable. But the deeper pattern is that the conditions often keep expanding because the protector is not searching for connection. It is searching for a version of connection that never threatens the old wound. That is why control and loneliness often live side by side. The same inner force that keeps you from being hurt also keeps you from being deeply met. The same intelligence that helps you read risk can slowly become an architecture of distance. You may call it standards, boundaries, or discernment, and sometimes those words are true. But when every door has 10 locks on it, the issue is no longer wisdom alone. It is a system that has begun to confuse safety with aliveness. Overthinking works the same way. On the surface, it looks like thoughtfulness, care, and depth. Beneath the surface, it is often the protector trying to solve exposure before life happens. It wants to think enough to prevent embarrassment, enough to prevent regret, enough to prevent the feeling of being caught unprepared. But life does not become safer because you think harder. It becomes narrower, and the protector often prefers narrow over living. Emotional shutdown follows the same logic through a different route. The protector learns that if feeling deeply once led to chaos, then reduced feeling begins to look like power. A person may become skilled at staying composed, staying productive, staying unaffected, and others may even admire this. Yet, there is a hidden price in learning how not to be reached. What protects you from being overwhelmed can eventually prevent you from being moved, and those are not the same condition. Hyperindependence is one of the clearest expressions of this hidden bargain. It often looks impressive because it produces competence, endurance, and self sufficiency. But underneath it, there is often a simple conclusion that was never fully spoken. Needing people is dangerous. Once that conclusion settles into the body, dependence begins to feel like weakness even when it is healthy, and receiving support begins to feel more threatening than carrying too much. The protector would rather exhaust you than let you feel exposed in your need. This is why meeting the protector requires more than naming it. If you treat it like an enemy, it becomes more defensive. If you treat it like your deepest truth, it keeps running your life unchallenged. The real work is learning to hear what it is trying to prevent without allowing that prevention to become your whole identity. The protector must be respected for its history without being obeyed as your future. That requires a shift in perspective that many people resist at first. The question is not whether the protector is right to exist, it clearly had reasons. The question is whether the strategy it formed still fits the life you are trying to live now. Something can be understandable and still be outdated. Something can be intelligent and still be costly. Something can protect your younger self while quietly limiting your present one. Once this becomes visible, your inner world starts to organize differently. You stop asking only whether a decision feels safe and begin asking what version of safety you are being offered. Is it the safety of grounded clarity or the safety of reduced exposure? Is it the safety that supports growth or the safety that avoids being touched? Is it the safety of wisdom or the safety of contraction? That distinction changes more than most people realize because it reveals that not every no comes from truth. You also begin to understand why growth can feel strangely threatening even when it is wanted. The protector does not measure progress the way the conscious mind does. It measures proximity to old pain. So, a good opportunity can feel dangerous. A healthy relationship can feel destabilizing. A moment of recognition can feel uncomfortable. The body may react if something is wrong when what is actually happening is that life is moving beyond the limits the protector once set. This is where patience becomes more important than force. If you push past the protector without listening, you often create backlash. If you never question it, you stay confined inside an older range of selfhood. The path is narrower and more honest than either extreme. You learn to notice when protection is becoming overreach, when caution is becoming confinement, and when the guarded life is beginning to cost more than the pain it was designed to prevent. And once you begin seeing that, another question starts to rise with more weight than before. If so much of your control, distance, and self management has actually been shaped by protection, then what would your life feel like if safety no longer meant staying hidden from the very experiences that could change you? Most people try to change the protector by arguing with it, and that almost never works for long. You can tell yourself that you are safe now, that the past is over, that not every risk ends in harm, and the words may even sound true. But the protector was not built by language alone. so it does not loosen because of language alone. It was built by repeated emotional consequences, by moments that taught the body what happens when openness goes badly, and anything formed that way usually requires a different kind of proof. That proof is not found in grand breakthroughs as often as people imagine. It is usually built through repeated experiences where openness does not produce the old result. A person speaks honestly and is not punished for it. A person needs support and is not shamed for it. A person is seen more clearly and does not lose their ground. The protector changes slowly because it has to witness reality becoming different, not just hear a better explanation of it. This is where many people become impatient with their own process. They think that because they understand the pattern, they should already be beyond it. They expect insight to create immediate freedom, and when it does not, they begin criticizing themselves for still reacting. But understanding and retraining are not the same event. One reveals the structure, the other changes the reflex. And reflexes usually take longer because they live closer to survival than to thought. You can see this clearly in moments where the protector activates before the mind has even caught up. A message arrives and your body tightens before you have formed an interpretation. A room changes tone and you become guarded before you can explain why. A conversation begins to move toward honesty, and suddenly you feel an urge to redirect, joke, become cold, or disappear. These reactions are not random failures of self control. They are signs that the protector is operating at a speed your conscious identity often notices only after the shift has already happened. That matters because it changes what healing looks like. Healing is not always a matter of stopping the first reaction. Sometimes it is the capacity to notice it sooner, understand it more accurately, and stop building an entire day around it. The old activation may still rise, but it no longer gets to define reality without question. A person can feel the guard come up and still remain present enough to ask whether the danger is current or remembered. That is already a major change, even if it does not feel dramatic. This is also why compassion has to become more precise than softness. Vague self kindness is not enough when a protector has been running your patterns for years. You need a compassion that can look directly at the strategy and still tell the truth about what it cost. Otherwise, compassion becomes permission for repetition. The protector does not need to be hated, but it does need to be understood well enough that you stop confusing its caution with your deepest wisdom. You begin to notice that the protector almost always has a preferred prediction. It expects disappointment before closeness has a chance to deepen. It expects misunderstanding before honesty has fully landed. It expects overwhelm before surrender has even begun. The prediction then shapes behavior in ways that help produce the very experience it fears, which is why so many guarded people live inside patterns that seem to confirm their worldview. They're not inventing the risk, but they are often participating in the conditions that keep the risk familiar. This is one of the harder truths to face because it does not flatter anyone. The protector is not only a shield, it can also become a pattern generator. It chooses distance, then reads the loneliness as proof that deep connection is rare. It chooses control, then reads the dryness of life as proof that depth is dangerous. It chooses self containment, then reads the absence of real support as proof that depending on others is foolish. In that way, the strategy keeps renewing itself, not because it is always right, but because it keeps arranging life in its own image. Once you understand that, you start hearing the protector differently. You no longer hear only what it says. You hear the world it assumes. Beneath every guarded conclusion, there is usually a hidden philosophy about people, exposure, love, failure, need, or power. Some protectors believe people cannot hold your truth. Some believe rest leads to collapse. Some believe visibility invites punishment. Some believe if you are not prepared for every angle, life will humiliate you. Those beliefs often shape a whole personality long before they are ever spoken plainly. This is why change requires more than coping tools. It requires a shift in worldview. If the protector believes the world is fundamentally unsafe in the precise places where growth requires openness, then every new step will feel like betrayal of self. The person may want more intimacy, more creativity, more honesty, more aliveness, but the old worldview treats those very things as threat corridors. That is why people can sincerely desire change while resisting every doorway that leads to it. The issue is not always lack of courage. Sometimes it is that the inner map still names life giving territory as forbidden land. You may notice something else as this becomes clearer. The protector often becomes strongest in the areas where someone has real potential. It overmanages what matters most. It does not usually waste its deepest force on what feels irrelevant. It tightens around love that could actually matter, expression that could actually reveal something, work that could actually alter direction, rest that could actually soften the system. And because of that, many people misread the pressure as a sign they are going the wrong way. In many cases, the pressure is not proof of misalignment, it is proof that a threshold has been reached. That perspective changes how struggle is interpreted. Instead of assuming inner resistance always means stop, you begin asking what exactly is being threatened by this movement. Is this truly a warning that something is wrong? Or is it a sign that the protector senses unfamiliar openness? Is the friction arising because the path is false, or because the path is asking more visibility, more honesty, or more dependence than the old structure can comfortably allow? These are not small distinctions. They shape whether a person retreats from growth or learns how to move with greater intelligence through fear. Still, none of this means every impulse towards openness should be trusted automatically. Some people hear teachings like this and swing too far in the other direction. They begin treating all caution as fear, all discernment as defense, all hesitation as self sabotage. That creates a new kind of distortion because not every boundary is a prison and not every uncomfortable choice is a brave one. The point is not to erase protection. The point is to become able to distinguish between living protection and rigid protection, between wisdom that adjusts and strategy that repeats. Living protection stays responsive to present reality. It can listen, update, and soften when the moment allows. Rigid protection cannot do that. It reacts from stored conclusions and then calls the reaction truth. One is relational, the other is repetitive. One helps a person stay real in the present, the other keeps forcing the present to resemble the past. The difference matters because many people are not suffering from having boundaries. They are suffering from being governed by boundaries that were built in another season and never revised. This is where the body becomes a more honest teacher than the mind. When protection is living, there is usually steadiness in it, even when the answer is no. When protection is rigid, there is often contraction, urgency, numbness, or a hardening that feels more like withdrawal than clarity. The mind may provide elegant reasons in both cases, but the body often tells the deeper truth. One kind of no leaves you intact, the other leaves you smaller. You can watch this happen in very ordinary choices. There is a kind of rest that restores because it comes from wise limits, and there is another kind that isolates because it comes from retreat. There is a kind of silence that protects the sacredness of what is not ready to be shared, and there is another kind that hides because being known feels dangerous. There is a kind of independence that honors self respect, and there's another kind that refuses support because receiving would expose an unmet need. Outwardly, the behaviors may look similar, but inwardly, they are shaped by very different laws. That is why the real question is not simply, what are you doing? The deeper question is, what inner agreement is this action serving? Is this choice aligned with your life or aligned with your defense? Is this boundary preserving what matters or preserving the familiar? Is this caution creating wise pacing or creating another loop of distance disguised as maturity? The more honestly a person can ask those questions, the less the protector gets to operate behind noble language. At a deeper level, meeting the protector reveals something many people have never considered. The self is not only shaped by what it loves, it is also shaped by what it has learned to avoid at all costs. That means identity can become organized around prevention without the person realizing it. They think they know who they are, but much of that self knowledge may simply be the shape left by repeated avoidance. A person can mistake adaptation for essence if they have lived with it long enough. This is where the teaching widens beyond the protector itself. Once you start seeing how much of life has been quietly shaped by what must not happen again, you begin re examining whole regions of identity. Your standards, your pace, your emotional range, your tolerance for being seen, your relationship to need, your relationship to uncertainty, even your definition of peace may all deserve another look. Not because they are false, but because some of them may have been built around old pain rather than present truth. That is a sobering realization, but it is also a liberating one, because what was built can often be rebuilt, and rebuilding usually begins in smaller moments than people expect. It begins when you stay in a conversation a little longer without abandoning yourself. It begins when you ask for help before total exhaustion forces it out of you. It begins when you admit that your certainty may be covering fear rather than clarity. It begins when you let one moment of safe contact land deeply enough that the protector does not immediately explain it away. Those moments may look unimpressive from the outside, but they are often how a guarded life begins to change its internal laws. So the work is not to become exposed all at once. The work is to become honest about the ways protection has become identity, and then slowly give the system new evidence about what reality can hold. That evidence must be lived, not merely admired. It has to reach the body, the habits, the tone of your decisions, the way you remain present when the old reflex tells you to tighten or vanish. And once that process begins, another question starts rising beneath the first one, quieter, but even more important. If protection has been shaping not only your fear, but your identity, then what else inside you has been waiting for room to exist once guarding is no longer the center of the life? What begins to return when guarding loosens is not always dramatic. It is often something quieter than people expect and more destabilizing in an honest way. A person may begin to feel preference where they once felt only strategy. They may begin to feel tenderness where they once felt only management. They may begin to notice desire, grief, curiosity, warmth, and even confusion in places that had long been ruled by control, and that can feel strangely disorienting because a heavily guarded life often mistakes reduction for clarity. This is one of the hidden consequences of strong protection. The protector does not only reduce pain, it also reduces range. It narrows what can be felt, chosen, trusted, or expressed until life becomes manageable enough to survive but too controlled to reveal deeper truth. When that narrowing begins to reverse, people often assume they are becoming less stable because they are feeling more at once. In many cases, the opposite is happening. They are becoming more real, and reality usually contains more than defense was ever willing to allow. That is why the return of feeling should not be misread too quickly. More feeling does not automatically mean regression. More uncertainty does not automatically mean you are lost. Sometimes what looks like instability is actually the reappearance of parts of experience that were suppressed so thoroughly that their return feels foreign. A person who has lived through long protection often meets their own aliveness as if it were a stranger, and that encounter can feel both relieving and unsettling at the same time. You can see this in simple moments. A person who has spent years staying composed suddenly feels moved by kindness and does not know what to do with the softness. A person who has built identity through independence feels genuine desire for support and immediately questions whether they are becoming weak. A person who has lived by control notices spontaneous joy and feels almost suspicious of it, as if ease must be naive or temporary. These moments matter because they reveal that the protector had not only been preventing pain, it had also been screening out dimensions of life that do not fit its logic. This changes the question from how do I stop protecting to how do I stay present when life begins to return. That is a much different kind of work. Stopping protection can become another forceful project, another performance of change, another way to pressure the system into becoming someone new on command. Staying present is harder and more honest. It requires the ability to feel more without immediately converting that feeling into a new strategy. That is where many people discover that the protector had also been organizing their sense of self respect. They learn to admire themselves for being hard to reach, hard to shake, hard to need, hard to surprise. Those qualities may have felt like strength for a long time because they made survival more reliable. But once a guarded life begins to soften, an uncomfortable question often appears. If so much of your pride was built on how little you needed, how much you controlled, and how well you concealed, then what becomes your new measure of strength? This is a deeper question than it first appears. Many people think they want healing, but what they really want is less pain without any change to the identity built around enduring it. They want more connection without having to be more reachable. They want more peace without giving up the self image formed around vigilance. They want more life while remaining unprotected from the unpredictability that life actually requires. That tension is not failure. It is one of the central thresholds in this kind of inner work. So strength has to be redefined with more honesty. Strength is not merely the ability to stay sealed. It is also the ability to remain open without losing your center. It is not merely the ability to carry your weight alone. It is also the ability to let support exist without feeling diminished by it. It is not merely the ability to avoid collapse. It is also the ability to stay present when old defenses no longer tell you exactly who to be. This is where the protector can finally be seen in its full complexity. It was never only a problem. It was also an intelligence that kept you moving through conditions you may not have known how to survive otherwise. It learned pattern, timing, restraint, discipline, and distance because those things created enough order to keep your life functioning. The issue is not that it existed. The issue is that it became central for too long. And anything that remains central beyond its season begins to shape identity in ways that no longer serve life. That perspective matters because it prevents a common mistake. People often swing from over identifying with the protector to resenting it completely. They become angry that so much of their life was shaped by fear, angry that closeness felt hard, angry that rest felt unsafe, angry that spontaneity disappeared under management. Some of that anger is understandable. It can also become another way of abandoning what once kept you alive. The protector does not need worship, and it does not need contempt. It needs right placement. Right placement means the protector becomes one form of intelligence among others, not the ruler of the whole inner world. It still gets to signal caution when something is truly misaligned. It still gets to notice patterns, inconsistencies, and conditions that deserve care. But it no longer gets to define the entire meaning of risk. It no longer gets to call every form of openness a threat. It no longer gets to decide your future based only on what it remembers about the past. Once that shift begins, other forms of knowing start becoming easier to recognize. Discernment becomes easier to feel because it is no longer confused with fear. Desire becomes easier to trust because it is no longer instantly interpreted as recklessness. Rest becomes easier to receive because it is no longer framed as collapse. Connection becomes easier to explore because the body is learning that closeness is not automatically the beginning of danger. These changes may seem subtle at first, but they reshape the whole tone of a life over time. You may notice that the real transformation is not usually dramatic release. It is increased accuracy. You become more accurate about what is actually happening in you. You become more accurate about what a given moment is asking. You become more accurate about the difference between old activation and present truth. That accuracy is powerful because it breaks the old habit of reacting to remembered danger as if it were always current reality. This is where the deeper freedom starts becoming practical rather than abstract. A person can pause before withdrawing and ask whether the silence they want is protective wisdom or defensive habit. A person can feel the urge to overthink and ask whether more analysis will create clarity or just preserve distance. A person can feel the pull toward self containment and ask whether independence in this moment is self respect or refusal to be known. Those are small moments on the surface, but they are where a guarded identity begins to loosen its hold. There is also a wider implication that many people overlook. When protection stops dominating the inner world, time begins to feel different. A guarded life is often organized around anticipation. It is always reading ahead, bracing early, preparing for impact, calculating exposure. That creates a life that feels mentally crowded even when nothing obvious is happening. As protection softens into right placement, presence becomes more available, not because the world becomes predictable, but because the self is no longer spending all its energy trying to outrun possibility. That shift in time changes experience more than most people expect. Ordinary moments become less compressed by vigilance. Rest becomes less contaminated by internal monitoring. Conversations become less about managing impression and more about actual contact. Even uncertainty changes character. It may still be uncomfortable, but it is no longer immediately translated into threat. The world begins to feel less like something to stay ahead of and more like something that can actually be met. This is also why healing often feels strangely humbling. As the protector loosens, people sometimes realize how much of what they called personality was actually adaptation, how much of what they called standards was actually fear, how much of what they called peace was actually controlled distance. That realization can sting because it touches pride, yet it also opens the possibility of discovering a self that is not built only around defense. Humility here is not self rejection. It is the willingness to let truth revise identity. And once identity becomes revisable, possibility changes. You are no longer forced to live inside the same inherited assumptions about what closeness costs, what dependence means, what rest threatens, what visibility invites, what tenderness weakens, or what uncertainty destroys. You begin to see that many of those assumptions were not reality itself. They were conclusions protection drew under pressure. Some of them once made sense, but sense in one season does not make them permanent law. This does not mean the path ahead becomes simple. In some ways, it becomes more demanding because you can no longer hide as easily behind the old certainty that guarding provided. You begin having to choose more consciously, speak more honestly, pace more wisely, and remain more present in moments where old reflexes still try to reclaim the center. But the demand is different from the old burden. The old burden was constant self management. The new demand is deeper participation in your own life. So the work does not end in becoming endlessly open, endlessly soft, or endlessly unguarded. That would be another distortion. The deeper movement is toward wholeness that includes protection without being ruled by it, tenderness without being overwhelmed by it, discernment without turning it into distance, and strength without turning it into concealment. When that movement becomes real, you start seeing that the protector was never the final shape of the self. It was a phase of intelligence inside a larger life. And once that larger life begins to breathe more freely, there is still more to learn about what becomes possible when safety is no longer defined by how little of you is allowed to be fully here.
If this transmission resonated, the spiral continues. You did not arrive here by chance, and you do not leave unchanged. More teachings are unfolding across the Vaharat library, each one meeting you where you are, not where you think you should be. Follow resonance. The next threshold is already listening.